First off, welcome. This is Pop Culture Classroom. My name is Jorge Arroyo. I am an art educator and one of the outreach teachers here at Pop Culture Classroom, and we're going to be talking about perspective today. So a lot of stuff to dive into. I will always tell you, and any of my other colleagues can tell you, there's a lot to cover with perspective, way more to cover than in an hour, but I'm really going to try and get you guys the nuts and bolts, the essentials as far as perspective goes. So, and also bear with me, this is my first live stream, so if I struggle with the technology a little bit, I ask you to provide me some grace on that. So, and I am kind of monitoring the chat when I can, so I can't see it on my phone. Hi, Bubbles85, welcome to the class. All right, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so perspective. When we're talking about perspective, what are we really talking about? What is perspective, and why, as aspiring artists and comic book artists, why do we care about perspective? Well, one thing, when we're talking about perspective, we're talking about when this idea when things are closer to us, they appear bigger, but when things are farther away, they just appear smaller. It sounds pretty simple to process because whenever we're out in the world, that's how we see things. Whenever something's far away, it's really hard to make out any details, but when things are closer, we can make out a ton of details. But as being an artist, it is a little not troubling. It's a little hard to get that. I forget. I'm kind of losing myself here. And first off, I need to mute my sound on my computer. So when we are thinking perspective, like, why do we care as artists? Because when we are doing art, we need to add a little bit of realism. We can be as fantastical as we want, but there needs to be a grain of truth with that fantasy. So perspective helps give that kind of realism, because when we're looking at things, our brains process things in patterns. So when we see a pattern of like something's closer to us, so we see more detail, we register that, we respond to it. So that's the basic idea behind perspective, but it can be challenging for artists to get, especially if you're starting out and you don't know where to start. Also, as a storytelling device, perspective really helps us set scenes. If we're looking at different scenes and we want a certain feeling for that scene, we can use perspective to achieve that aim. And after this a little bit, I'll be showing you guys like some examples of this stuff. So you can also suggest scale with perspective. So if you're looking at a city scene and you're looking at it from a certain point of view, you can get the feeling that you're small. Or if you're looking from bird's eye view, you can still feel like you're very small looking at this stuff, but you're empowered because you're looking over the scene. And as well, perspective can help us guide the viewer's eye. So when we're thinking about art, when we are creating art, we're wanting to really guide the viewer's eye to the stuff that's most important to us. So keep that in mind when we're thinking about perspective. So let's go ahead and check out some examples. All right. I really dig this example. My kids, I have two little girls, my kids have been obsessed with Shrek lately, and it's been nice to revisit those movies because they really are fantastic movies, and they're very well made too. So this is a scene from Shrek 2, the heroes, they don't know how to get to the fairy godmother and everything, so as Gingerbread Man is standing on a little like ledge right in front of the city of Far, Far Away, Shrek looks at him and sees the big gingerbread man right there. And he gets the idea. It's like, wait a minute, can't we just make a bigger one of you to go ahead and storm the city with? So that's an example of what you call forced perspective. So that idea is like, since we see Gingerbread Man as really big right in the front against Far Far Away, which is really small in the background, we get the idea that Gingerbread Man is bigger than the city itself. So that gives Shrek the idea. So that's an example of forced perspective. And that was a good storytelling device they use in order to communicate to the audience, hey, Shrek has an idea and this is how he got it. And again, you want to consider the kind of story you're telling. So this is a good example. So like when you're doing comic book illustrations, when you're thinking about like setting a scene, not often you'll see things, and let's see if I can, I'll have to figure that out at some other point. I want to draw on my presentation here, but I'll do that later in Procreate. So on the far left right there, you see the character design. It's facing right towards you, right in front of you. That's not good for dynamic scenes because not often do you see people just like staring right at you, especially if you're thinking about a movie and everything. You always see them at some sort of angle. So in that middle scene, we're looking up at this character, and that gives that character almost like a sense of power, a sense of, even though he has this kind of, conflicted look on his face, it can also communicate like some determination, like he is determined to complete something or to fight some people or something to that effect. It is already telling a story just how we're looking at the character. On the far right, we also see us kind of looking slightly down onto the character. This can make that character seem kind of small and also kind of have us consider like what this character is going through. His look looks a little different in that far right sketch, and we wonder what's going on with this character. Like maybe he is conflicted about something, maybe he is feeling small at that moment. So think of perspective as how you can use it to tell your story, to set a scene. I like this sketch especially, so we're looking from behind the character, but perspective is still used in order to communicate just the adversity, the challenges that this character is going to face. He is one man facing basically what looks like an army. We see what looks like almost like a general type of character in the front there. He's a little smaller, and our character is bigger, so that is a good way to do some storytelling right there. Our character feels determined and he feels empowered to confront this whole army. The general has some minions in the back, but in the background we see a lot of just smaller little figures. While they're not powerful, just this one small figure by themselves, as a whole, that gives the impression of a whole big army. So we get the idea of what this character is about to face. So that is another way to use perspective, is to highlight and notice when you first see this, your eye immediately goes to the character, to their shadowed silhouette right there. And then you go to the general and all the army and see what that character has to face. So again, this is using perspective to tell a story. So now we're going to transition to Procreate here, because I've got a few other examples that I want to talk about. And then we're going to get into like the anatomy as perspective and how we can get started with that. So again, setting a scene, you can suggest scale with perspective. So in the scene up here, in the upper left-hand corner, we have this kind of like we have this looking up perspective as we're looking at the city. So if I was a character emerging into the scene, maybe I would draw this character. So there'd be the head. Let's get his shoulders in. Maybe I would draw this character as looking up at the city. And the story that tells is that he is having to contend with the city. He doesn't know what he's going to do. There are so many ways you can tell a story with just how that perspective is against the scale of that character. So notice he's going to be very small. But if we go to the example in the bottom right-hand corner, this is a classic example of how Spider-Man scenes are often drawn. So if I was going to be an artist drawing Spider-Man here, and in his most natural position, if I was going to draw him as swinging around, so let's see, let's do a rough sketch here. So usually he's hanging on. See, he's hanging on to his web and everything. So, but usually he's also slinging to somewhere else. So, let's see if I can get this. And by the way, I'm just doing some quick gesture drawings to kind of get this out the way. If you guys are interested in more gesture drawing, our other instructor, Dion, who is a freelance illustrator, has an awesome instructional video on how to do gesture drawing. So I really highly recommend doing that or checking that out. So right there, we're drawing Spider-Man as really big against the city skyline. We see the city and it looks big, it looks enormous, but we're seeing it from a bird's eye point of view, and seeing Spider-Man up against that all communicates that he's swinging around. He's doing his Spider-Man thing, and he's just getting around the city like he likes to get around. So again, it's all about setting that scene. It's all about setting that mood. Spider-Man is a very adventurous character, I feel like, and having those types of scene where he's just not afraid of the city. The city's his playground. That's where he lives. That's New York. That's his town. And for the most part, being able to swing around it, he owns that city. So keep this in mind as far as how to use perspective to tell your story. So, let's see. Let's go ahead and transition here. So I've got another example here. So we're going to talk about, so we're going to go ahead, and if you want to follow along, let me go ahead and say this. So if you want to follow along with these drawings, if you want to get some more anatomy of how to do perspective drawing, feel free to get yourself a pencil, a ruler, and some paper. Really, that's the only three things that you need to be able to do this. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to Procreate, and I'm going to draw, so using this picture as an example, I'm going to point out some things as far as perspective goes that you'll need to know. So when we're talking about perspective, let me make sure this will show up there. When we're talking about perspective, the scene is set in a few different ways, and there are some things you guys need to remember. So first off is going to be what's called the horizon line. And literally, that is just what that sounds like. This is the line that denotes where the horizon is. That's where the Earth is sloping out into the distance. So that's that straight line that you always see when you're looking out at a landscape. So that's our horizon line. Next, we're going to talk about our vanishing points. So notice that these train tracks are going there, Let me get that a little straighter. Right around where they're all intersecting, you can even notice like the grass around here is going to that point. What this point is a vanishing point. That's where things disappear into. So that's our vanishing point right there. Next thing, so these lines that I just drew that go towards the horizon line, these are called, and this is a big word, I don't expect you guys to know this word, but it's good to know all these terms too. But odds are very few people are going to ask you what these lines are. You just need to know what they are. but these lines, their big old scientific name or whatever, or technical name, they're called orthogonal lines. So your orthogonal lines, those are going to be the lines that are going towards your vanishing point. And the last thing I want to talk about as far as like the general anatomy of perspective is this right here. So where all this is, that is your ground plane. So it's definitely not ground, it's ground. But it's good to know where your ground plane is, because then you can orient some things on where they're going to be on your space. So if this is where your ground is, this is where your buildings are going to come up from. So keep that in mind. Not all the time when you're drawing perspective, not all the time you'll see the ground plane. Sometimes you'll be looking up at buildings, which I have a cool little project you guys can do and follow along with. Sometimes you'll be looking up at buildings and you'll be looking at the sky. You won't have a horizon line, you won't have a ground plane, but the vanishing point stuff and the orthogonal lines still apply in that situation. So keep that in mind. But generally, when you're drawing perspective, you'll have a ground plane and you'll have your horizon line. So keep that in mind. So again, I hope you guys are following along. I hope you guys have your materials, pencil, ruler, paper, because now we're going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and go to a blank canvas, and we're going to do some drawing along. So, and these are really simple perspective exercises. So, what we're going to start with, again, we want to start with a horizon line. And actually, I'm going to try that again. I want to make sure you guys are able to see this. So, and it doesn't matter where, but for the purposes of this lesson today, I'm just going to put it about 2/3 of the way down the paper. And let me all right, get that a lot straighter. All right, so again, there's our horizon line. Let me go ahead, just to remind you guys. So that's our horizon line. So let's go ahead and, again, that's our vanishing point. So you can place it anywhere. I mean, you could place it over to the sides here, but for the purposes of this exercise, we're just going to keep the vanishing point right in the middle there. So here's what we're going to do. Oops. All right, so if you want to follow along, go ahead with me. So first, whenever you guys are doing 3D objects, think about the planes of that 3D object. So just to make that simple for today, we're just going to be working with squares or cubes. We're going to start with squares, and then we're going to turn them into cubes using perspective. So here's what I'm going to do. So in the upper left-hand corner there, you guys are going to draw a square. And it doesn't have to be super duper perfect as long as it is very square-like. So we have our square. Let's go ahead and draw another square down in the lower right-hand corner. All right, and we're going to do one more square. We're going to, but this is the important part. We need to do that one more square. We're going to do it, have that square like on the horizon line, but here's the deal. You don't want that square. You don't want to do that square right over your vanishing point. And I'll kind of explain that to you guys in just a second. What you want to do is you want to have it to the side. You can either do it on this side, you can do it on that side, wherever you want. Just don't have it right on top of the vanishing point. Okay. All right, so we have our 3 squares right there. All right, so here's what we're going to do. So we have the sides of our cubes. Now we're going to turn these squares into cubes, and guess what? We're going to use those big term items. We're going to use those orthogonal lines to connect these squares to our vanishing point. So here's what you're going to do. On this upper left-hand square, you'll start at the corners. You're always going to go from the corners. So here's what you're going to do. Using your ruler, you're going to line up. So actually, let me draw this out. So pretend you had your ruler. Pretend you've already drawn your square, your horizon line, you've got all that, and you have your ruler. What you're going to do is you're going to line up your ruler and kind of do like a rough sketch of how this will look. So you'll have your ruler, and you guys are going to line up your ruler with these 2 corners. You're going to line up your vanishing point and that corner right there. And then once you have your ruler lined up, and I'm going to get rid of this ruler real quick. Once you have your ruler lined up and your 2 points lined up, what you're going to do is then draw a straight line. You're going to connect this corner to that vanishing point using the straight line. All right, so we've got one of those orthogonal lines for that part of the cube. Now we just go to this corner and this corner, and we're going to connect those 2 points. Again, use your ruler, line them up. I'm cheating here because Procreate has an awesome tool where if you hold it down, it makes a straight line, which is great. It makes it easier for me, but you can do this with your ruler as well. That's why you should have your ruler to make those straight lines. So now we have those orthogonal lines, and they are going all the way back to the vanishing point. But here's the thing. You only do it with these 3 corners. You can, if you want, you can connect this corner right here. But the thing with this back corner is that you're not going to see this. So when we're looking at things, we only see certain sides of an object, and we don't see the backs of objects. Now, it's good to have these for like structure lines and searching lines. That's totally fine. But in your final drawing, you're not going to see that back side. But for the purposes of this exercise, I will show you guys like what that would look like. So let's go ahead and finish off this cube. And here's what's going to happen. So let's choose this point right here. Draw a line down to this orthogonal line. So, and you want to make sure your lines are parallel. So when things are parallel, they are equal distance no matter where they go. So these 2 lines right here, they're parallel to each other. A big mistake a lot of beginners do is they'll do something like this. They'll do something like this, but that doesn't look accurate. So if I were to, let's see here. Actually, let me draw from that corner over here. If I was to go ahead and finish that off, and I went ahead and, let's see here, make sure my opacity is up. And if I went ahead and erased all these lines, that's my brush size. I'm going to choose a different one. Actually, just to get rid of some of the stuff. Let's see. Here, let's try that. Oh, that's too big. Let's try that again. Let's see if I can just quick erase. So if I were to just have that one side, that is not an accurate cube. In fact, I don't know what shape that is, but that's not accurate. A lot of beginning artists make these mistakes. Again, they're not getting those parallel lines in there. So you need to have those parallel lines so your stuff looks accurate, because perspective is really about drawing things accurately. And again, we can be as fantastical as we want, but there has to be an element of truth into what you're drawing so audiences respond to that. So we'll leave our parallel lines. Go ahead, finish that off. All right, and then we can erase. Let's make this a little smaller. Then we can go ahead and erase those structure lines that we don't need anymore. And then we can go ahead and even add some shading to our cube to make it look even more realistic. But the thing with your shading is you're going to have one really dark side. It depends on where your light source is coming from. So let's say the light source was coming from here. So you're going to have this be your dark side right here. This will probably be fairly dark, but not as dark. You can keep this dark as you want. So maybe let's say the light source is coming from like over here. So let's go ahead and keep this the lightest, but that's how you get that three-dimensional effect with perspective. So we're going to go really quickly. So I'll just do the rest of these really quick so you guys see that. So same thing, even with this lower one, we connect vanishing point to your points on your cube. Ignore this point because, again, you're not going to see those sides. And we have our friend that's on the horizon line, but not right on our vanishing point. See, I mentioned this because if he was on our vanishing point, it would just be a square. That's it, you're done. But that really isn't demonstrating perspective. That's just demonstrating it's right in front of us and we don't see any other sides. But if it's to the side, we're still going to see this side line right here. Let's finish off our cube here. Oops. And that side right there. Okay, and then again, once you have your cubes all figured out, your orthogonal lines are down, you can go ahead and erase any and all lines that you don't need anymore. So with this one, we don't need to see the horizon line because the cube is covering it up. Oop, I do want to see the horizon line there, but I don't need to see those orthogonal lines anymore. So just cleaning that up. All right. And there are our three cubes in perspective. So keep that in mind. Again, you want your lines to be parallel. Don't make them like this. That's not accurate as far as cubes go. And it does depend on what kind of shape you're doing. It's a little harder to do with things like cones. It's a little harder to do with things like pyramids as well. You can do that, but it's just a little trickier. But in fact, no, we'll do that later. But That's how you do objects in a 3D perspective, but that's just one point perspective. So this is considered one point perspective because we only have our one vanishing point right there. That is 1 point perspective. So why do I bring that up? Because there are things you can go to 2-point perspective, you can go to 3-point perspectives, you can go all the way up to 5 and even more so. It gets crazy, and you get some pretty cool drawings when you do that. But again, we only have about another half an hour, so I can only cover a bit of 2-point perspective after this, and then we're going to go to our little project. So, all right, so let's go ahead and clear this. So now we're going to transition into 2-point perspectives. So again, just a model of good behavior. I'm going to start with my horizon line right there. This time, I'm going to do 2 vanishing points. So again, 2-point perspective is basically going to equal 2 vanishing points. So we're going to go over to the left over here and put a vanishing point right there. And then I'm going to go to the right, put a vanishing point over there. Now, again, we want to remember our parallel lines. This time, we're going to do 2 sides of a cube, but it'll be a lot simpler to do it this time, so you won't have to draw your squares out. This time, we're going to do just 1 line. So here's what I'm going to do. Do the same thing I did with my last example. We're going to do 3. Okay. We're going to do a line there. Let's go ahead and do a line here. And you can have this near the middle if you want, because our vanishing points are to the sides this time. So keep that in mind. And then we're going to do a line down here in the lower right corner. All right. Same deal. So we have those lines. What this line is going to be, that is going to be the sides of our object. So if you have like 2 sides of a cube here, pretend I'm doing a cube here, that side right here, that's the side we're seeing right now in these lines. So what we're going to do, again, using our orthogonal lines. I feel like I'm just going to use that term just so you guys get it drilled into your heads. It's a fun term, and I hardly ever ask students about it, but it's still good to know. That term has a name. Okay, going to do my orthogonal line. So from this vanishing point right here, I connect it to these 2 corners right here. But now what we're going to do, now we're going to connect this corner over to this vanishing point. All right. And now, again, you want to keep your lines parallel. So we're going to define the sides of the square. So just choose any point on this like little area right here. It doesn't matter. It can be big. You can choose a point there. It can be, or it can be really small. It's up to you. But choose a point and do your parallel line. Remember, they run right next to each other. They never cross, but they are straight towards each other. So you'll do a line there and choose a point. Do a line on the other side. And now this is where we complete the bottom side of our cube. So you're going to take this vanishing point, you're going to connect it to this line right out here, but we're going to also take this corner right here connect this to our vanishing point all the way over here. And that's it. That is a cube in 2-point perspective. We've got these two sides going to two different vanishing points. So as before, you can go ahead and erase all the lines that you don't need. And for the sake of time, I'll just leave some of them here. But for the most part, you get the idea. That is a cube in 2-point perspective. Again, you can add some shading. You can figure out where your light source is going to be coming from. You'll always have a side that's like really, really dark next to lightest, and then your lightest side. But that's a cube in a 2-point perspective. Same thing. We're just going to go real quick with these other sides as well. And just kind of clean this up a little bit. And sometimes people get tripped up because sometimes they won't. In fact, I recommend you erase your orthogonal lines sometimes while you're drawing, maybe, because sometimes people will get confused on like which lines connect to what. So just keeping your page clean and clear kind of helps you out. So let's go ahead, connect this vanishing point over to our middle line. Okay. And this corner right here is going to go to our other vanishing point. Okay, and then again, choose a place, doesn't matter where. And then choose a place on this side. And then there we have that cube that's resting on the horizon line, but it is in perspective with both vanishing points on either side. This one's tricky to erase the orthogonal lines because you'll want to erase the horizon line, but try not to do that unless the horizon line is inside your cube. Because realistically, you wouldn't see your horizon line inside your cube because your cube is covering that up. Also think about with your shapes, like realistically, what are your shapes covering up? What is your human eye actually going to see of these shapes? That's really going to help out your perspective drawing, is keeping track of what the eye is going to see as opposed to what the eye isn't going to see. Just checking the time here. It is 38. Oh, we're doing good. So we'll do this last little cube here at the bottom. Actually, move this on up so you guys can see what I'm doing. And let me also check out the chat. Okay, sorry about that. I do tend to go a little bit fast, so if you guys have any questions up to this point, I am kind of like looking at 3 screens at once, so I'll try to go a little bit slower with this one cube at least. So, which thank you, Copic2414, for slowing me down. I do tend to go fast with these things. All right, so we've got our line right here. Remember, that's going to be the side of our cube right there. So again, going to connect that line with our vanishing point right here. So let's go ahead. This one will be a little bit fun too, because we're going to look at this at an interesting angle. So going from this line right here, connecting that. All right, so we've got one slide already connected to that vanishing point to the right. So now we're going to connect this corner again over to this vanishing point over here. So let's go ahead. All right. Ooh, this will give me a good example of like what to do with like different shapes on top of each other too. So let me show you. Let's do this. So again, you want to keep track of what your eye is going to see. So let's go ahead and put the side of this cube. Let's go ahead and put it like over here, so that this cube right here is kind of resting almost on this cube on the or well, it's going to be like a rectangular object now. So let's do it like that. So got our line right here. Let's go ahead and put a line like way far up. Perfect. All right, so now here's what we're going to do. This is going to get tricky, but this is part and parcel of like what makes perspective drawing fun, is like trying to figure out like what lines stay, what lines go. And when you figure that out, this really gets fun, just because you can create a lot of different things depending on those lines. So and yeah, I have my friend Dion on the moderator chat kind of pointing out like, oh my god, these are starting to look like buildings. That's the thing. So you can use perspective even in your anatomy drawing, because you can kind of like cube like humans into like a kind of like rectangular standing box, and then you can turn that rectangle how you want, and depending on where that is, where your head's going to be, how small things are going to be, and how big things are going to be. So you can do that. You can basically essentially like carve with different shapes in perspective. So, and I'll actually do an example of that kind of carving here with this. So what lines are we going to get rid of? So we're not going to get, I'll point them out. We're not going to get rid of this line. We're not going to get rid of this line, but we are going to get rid of this, 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 and this. So let's see what that looks like. Okay. So again, keeping the integrity of this cube, making sure it's still accurate. Just going to clean up those lines a little bit. And we're going to get rid of this line. Going to our vanishing point. These lines. Oops. There we go. And then we're going to get rid of all of these lines because we don't need them. They're not a part of our cubes. They just help us be able to structure things and help us know where to place certain things. So we're going to stop at the edge of that cube right there. And there we go. Oh my God. This cube is resting on this cube right here. You can, it can get nitpicky sometimes, because sometimes your orthogonal lines will look straight, even though there's technically like a corner of this cube right here, but you don't really like see it, because at a certain point the lines will kind of meld together. So, but that's okay. That's totally fine. So right now this cube is resting on this, so let's add some shadowing right here, which means we're going to have some shadow right here. I'm going really quick, of course. I'm trying to slow down. All right, so actually, let's go ahead. One last thing. So talking about carving and using these as buildings, so let's go ahead and add let's kind of carve out something in this particular one right here. So let's say, so I'm going to choose this line right here and connect this. Come on. Connect this there. And connect this there. And And we have our two lines right there. So let's also go straight there. There. And then let's go ahead and erase that. Erase that, and I'll clean this up in just a little bit. But getting rid of the lines that I don't need. Technically, there's an orthogonal line here. There's that orthogonal line right there. We don't need those. And you can't really see it too much. If it was a little more up, you could. But let's pretend. Let's pretend this is a building. And that's a little balcony there. This is just really rough, just to show you guys an example. Through this way, through perspective, you can go ahead and start carving out shapes to make buildings. And that's probably one of my favorite things to do with perspective is just do cityscapes. You can really get a lot of cool effects with doing perspective and cityscapes. And not to mention, it just impresses people when you're able to get it down right. But like there is essentially a balcony. Let's even add a little door there. All right, looks like a good balcony. People can look out from under. But and later, I don't need to erase it. Heck, why not? And then there's our building. We keep our horizon line. Clean up this line. And then there's our building. There is our like rudimentary building. It's very simple, not a lot to it, but already. And if you really wanted to get like really neat and tidy, you could connect like these lines to your vanishing point to make sure all your stuff is accurate. So that is 2-point perspective. And oh, hi, Dragon Master 700. Hi. That is 2-point perspective. So, and that's really what I've got for you guys today. So we went over 1-point perspective and 2-point perspective. So I'm going to show you guys. So let's see, what am I? So again, just some troubleshooting tips when your stuff isn't looking like it should. So make sure you guys remember, make sure you're connecting your points to your vanishing points. And again, make sure those lines are parallel. Of course, I can't remember how to spell parallel right now, but make sure your lines are parallel. I see a lot of mistakes as far as that goes, and make sure you're connecting the sides of your object to your vanishing points. And again, it kind of helps up to clean up some of these lines just so you don't get yourself confused and you kind of know where you're standing. I find if I'm doing just pencil and paper, it helps a lot to draw very lightly. Before so let's say like I did this line, let's see here. So let's say I did this line up to this point. So usually I'd be drawing all these lines very, very lightly. The only ones I'm committing to the paper are the ones that I'm keeping. So like this line right here, this line right here, those are the ones I'm committing. But these are going to be my structure lines that I can erase really easily later on. So also draw very lightly when you guys are figuring out where your perspective is and where to go, where you're going to be going with this. So, so let's go ahead and erase this for now, and I'll show you guys. So this is a project I do with my students. It's really simple to do, and again, like I said, Not all the time you're going to have a horizon line. Not all the time you're going to have a ground plane. The ground plane could be right behind you. Right now, this is an idea of, looking up at a stack of skyscrapers. So how would we start this? I'll show you guys right now. So since we've got a little bit of time, let's go ahead and try and figure this out. So if we're doing the buildings, what you can do, so again, no horizon line, but what you're still going to need is a vanishing point. So let's go ahead and do one right in the middle. And if you guys, and yes, thanks, Matt. This would be 1 point perspective. So that is whenever you see all your things going to just one vanishing point, that is 1 point perspective. So we're just doing a 1 point perspective little project right here. So let's choose just 1 point. That'll be our vanishing point right there. And let's go ahead. Let's do like 3 buildings. And you can decide how big these buildings are going to be. Right now, we're just defining our lines. We're defining the sides of our buildings right now. And let's bring that over here. All right. So actually, we'll do one more because we're going to need a side to this building right here. All right. So, all right, let's say we're going to have 3 buildings. Let's go ahead and define the tops of those buildings. I'm going to do this real quick. So we'll define the tops of our buildings. They don't have to be all the same height. You can have some that are shorter than others. And this is a good project for me to point out like where people kind of screw up a little bit. So now, again, remembering those parallel lines, you want to define the sides of these buildings. So we have this side of the building. A lot of my students, they'll do this. They will go ahead and do something like this. That's not necessarily wrong, but it does make the building look a little bit wonky. As well, they'll do stuff like they'll also do stuff like that. Like, that's not the side of the building. This is going to be the side of your building right here, but that side is not going to come up all the way over here. So, correct way would be to do that straight line. So with these sides of the building, so let's go ahead. So let's say our building is going to be that big. Our building is going to be this big. And with these sides of the buildings, you're only going to see 2 sides of your buildings. So this is 1, this is 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So let's just finish up our building right here, and our building right here. Again, making sure you have those straight lines going. And then you can go ahead and erase that because we don't need our orthogonal lines anymore. We've already finished our buildings. And then there we have 3 buildings in perspective as if we're looking up at them. You can add extra details, like you can add windows if you want. I would recommend, so if you're going to want to be accurate and everything, so start with those 1 sides and go ahead and connect. Connect. And see, this is off, but I was doing that really quickly. So connect. Still have your vanishing point right there, but go ahead and connect that vanishing point to the side so the sides of your windows can look accurate as well. So But that's a really quick project that you can do. As you can see, like a lot of people do it with markers. You'll notice there aren't any orthogonal lines anywhere in the middle to connect these to the vanishing points. Some of these buildings come up to a point. That's totally fine. And people like to get a little more creative with like their sky and everything and how those look. So that's a good, neat little project to do as far as like 1-point perspective. You can also do buildings in 2-point perspective, kind of how I demonstrated. So those are really cool to really like see as how much detail you can get into your buildings. So we've got 5 minutes left. So I just want to point out, let's see here. I don't want to go to the next. So I want to point out just some resources. So again, just to kind of wrap up, perspective is really important for comic book artists because, one, comic book artists are really trying to set a scene and they're trying to set a mood, and perspective is a good tool for helping them do that. As well, it also helps to create a sense of scale. So if we're having Spider-Man swinging across the rooftops, we want to see the detail on Spider-Man, less detail on the cityscape behind him, but we still want that cityscape behind him because that's a natural state for Spider-Man to be in, is just swinging across the city. So, but also remember let me go back to some of these examples. So also remember, like, I was in Procreate, that's why. Also, remember what kind of story you're trying to tell. Maybe you are actually having your character be overwhelmed by the environment that he's in. That's when you would want to use this kind of perspective, is to just generate that sense of scale, even that sense of wonder at the world that this character finds himself in. Think about what kind of story you're trying to tell, and then figure out what kind of perspective drawings you need in order to tell that story. So let me go back here. Again, I've got some resources for you guys. So one of the more popular ones is called Perspective for Comic Book Artists. It's by David Chelsea. Any of these you can find on Amazon. Another one is Perspective Made Easy. It's a little bit older, but it is by Ernest Norling, and it's got some good information on there. There's also another one, Anatomy and Perspective. So if you're really like trying to get into gesture drawing, where you're getting into your character and figure drawing and things like that, but you want your characters to be in a certain perspective, then this is a good one for that too. We've also shared this guy before. His name's Proco. He's on YouTube. He is an amazing art educator. He has a lot of informational videos on there, and one of them is Anatomy and Perspective. So again, if you guys are wanting to level up your perspective game as far as like your figure drawing goes, then definitely look up Proco and look up any of these books. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for coming to our live stream today. I really had a lot of fun doing this. Again, my name is Jorge Arroyo. I'm an art educator here at Pop Culture Classroom, and this was really fun. I hope you guys got a lot out of this class, and happy drawing. Hope you guys are staying safe, staying healthy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.